Hello, Malcolm Brady from Dublin City University. I want to take you through today through the PACE framework that I use to guide us through the strategy subject. So firstly, I'm going to start with some definitions that you see on your screen here. And you can see there's quite a lot of different definitions that are very different in nature. And I'm going to go through some of them and pick up some keywords from them. So the first one is the definition by Alfred Chandler, a business historian. And his is that strategy is the determination of the basic long-term goals and objectives of an enterprise and the adoption of courses of action and allocation of resources necessary for carrying out these goals. So you can see here, he's very much looking to the future, to goals and how to achieve those goals. So it's very much the looking at a plan or looking at the future of an enterprise or an organization. Second one is by Bauer and Al, who essentially started this subject. Wrote the original book on business policy. And their definition is that strategy is a pattern of purposes and policies that defines the company and its business. So you can see here, it's a pattern. It's not really goals and objectives isn't the center part here. It's a pattern. It's some kind of continuation or regularity in purposes and policies. So that's what they're looking at. You could argue it's somewhat looking at the past, and you look at what happened and what's the pattern in that. And it shows you that strategy is there whether you formally have it or not, in the sense that you always have a pattern of purposes of some kind or other, or a pattern of actions and decisions. And from that, you can infer a strategy. So it's looking backwards to some extent. Thompson and Strickland, your textbook, consider strategy as consisting of the moves and approaches devised by management to produce successful organizational performance. And the lower down one by Desk, Lumpkin and Eisner is very similar. Strategic management consists of analysis, decisions and actions that an organization undertakes in order to create and sustain a competitive advantage. Here again, the particular goals they're looking at or objectives they're looking at are organizational performance and competitive advantage. So, but they're similarly oriented towards the future and oriented towards some kind of plan that encompasses analysis, decision and action, or moves and approaches. The two further definitions by Christensen and Oster are more to do with choices. Christensen says strategy is the fit between internal competencies of the firm and external opportunities. So this is a question of matching internal with external factors. So there's a certain amount of choices and requiring a certain amount of fit there. And Sharon Oster suggests that it's a commitment to undertake one set of actions rather than another. So there's a choice here. It's not that there's all sorts of, it implies there's various different things you can do, and you must make a choice between one and the other, and you must commit to that choice. So there's two new words there, and then some more recent ones, Van Steen and McIntosh and McLean. I'll let you read McIntosh and McLean's definition yourselves. But Van Steen's one is interesting. He talks about the strategy being the smallest set of core choices to optimally guide the other choices. So this is very much in the strategy as simple rules vein of thinking. So you identify a set of principles and that guides your behavior. Now, I've taken keywords from these definitions and put them into this PACE framework. And you can see the different elements of it there. PACE being purpose, analysis, choice, and execution. Analysis, choice, and execution come from Johnson Scholl's text, and indeed from the Dess and Lumpkin definition that you saw there. And I've added the notion of purpose, and it was you must, in order to, before carrying out analysis and choosing and executing, you have to have a sense of what it is you're trying to achieve at all. So the notion of purpose is critical. You must know why the organization exists, why it's there, what its purpose is, what it's there to do. You must know that, and people in the organization must know that. So it must have a purpose, and you must know what the purpose is. They're not the same thing, okay? So you must also know what the purpose is. And that purpose is often defined or written up as vision, mission, and values. We'll come to that in another session. But analysis then, the keywords, opportunities, competences, resources, position, all of these are worked out by analyzing your situation. And that results in some identification of issues or diagnosis of what's critical in that situation. So the analysis leads to some form of diagnosis. Choice then, fit, pattern, objectives, decisions, goals, all of these things are various choice elements. And choice results in some kind of guiding policy. In other words, some sense of how you're going to go about. You've made a choice and how you're going to go about implementing it or executing it. And then you'll see here the action words: implementation, allocation, commitment, plan, policies. All of these are action-oriented words or execution-oriented words. And that's resulting in coherent action. So this is the basic PACE framework that I use to structure the strategy course. Now, here are some additional frameworks. We've seen the central one there: purpose, analysis, choice, and execution. That's our key framework. And we've already talked about that, comprising issues, decisions, actions, and so on. And indeed, this overlaps quite strongly with Richard Rumel's approach of diagnosis, guiding policy, and coherent actions that he says is the essence or the kernel of strategy. Many of you will have undergone or certainly been part of, or will have been aware of, the strategic management initiative carried out by the Irish government, where most departments and government organisations had to go through a strategic management process. And the key questions they asked there were: where are we now? Where do we want to get to? How are we going to get there? And how will we know when we've got there? So these are the first three questions are actually in your Thompson and Strickland textbook. But the additional one, how will we know when we've got there, is part of the strategic management initiative. And you can see the where are we now equates to the identification of the current situation, or basically is an analysis phase. Where do we want to get to is the creative or visionary phase that decides, where we're going, what is our vision, mission, and what are our specific objectives. How are we going to get there is the strategy itself. And how will we know? Well, we measure performance, and these are usually through means of identifying key performance indicators, or KPIs. So key measures that will determine will allow us to determine our performance, that we can measure and evaluate our performance against. Finally, I go to the top of the slide here and look at 4 characteristics of strategy. And first of all, the notion of holistic. You're taking an entire view. You're considering the firm or organization as a whole, not as subcomponents or subparts. So that's one of the critical things with strategy. It's not a strategy for marketing or for operations. It's for the organization as a whole, and must consider all these elements, not just one or two of the elements. It must consider the firm in its entirety. It must consider different timescales, long-term and short-term. It's not a question of just simply looking at the long-term. You also have to consider the short-term. You must get through the short-term, but also you must go to the right place in the long run. You must consider efficiency, doing the right thing, versus effectiveness, doing it right, or doing it efficiently, doing it correctly. And then, generally speaking, we're looking at multiple stakeholders having a say, or having an interest, or having an involvement in strategic management. So they're multiple, and they're also varied. They represent different kinds of constituencies. So you need to consider different kinds of stakeholders, and there are particular models for looking at that. This slide is the famous, well-known poem by John Godfrey Sachs, where he talks about an elephant. And if you look at different elements of the blind man looks at the elephant and only sees, say, one part of it, the trunk, the legs, or whatever, the tail, and comes to various different conclusions about what the elephant actually is. And it's only when you see the full elephant that you realize that the full nature of the animal. But by just looking at a piece, you might think it's a pipe or a whip or a column or whatever. The 2 points I've mentioned there, Gravity, the film Gravity, I think that gives a really good example of how 2 perspectives on the same situation can give you entirely different views. And the truth is somewhere between the two. You may recall the Sandra Bullock character detaches from the space station and goes off turning and rotating almost to infinity, off into the distance, watched by George Clooney. And he's watching her tumbling and tumbling and tumbling, and that's his view of the situation. And it looks as though she's completely out of control and tumbling away to infinity. And then the camera zooms in on the Sandra Bullock character and it turns around and looks at a perspective out through her visor. And what we see there is her perfectly still. And we see the Earth rotating around her. So From her perspective, she's still and the Earth is rotating, whereas from the George Clooney perspective, she's rotating and the Earth is still. But it's the same situation, just the two perspectives are entirely different. And I thought it was a great scene in that film. Now, time we mentioned about considering the long and short run. Drucker gives a good quote on this that I'm going to refer to. Management always has to consider both the present and the long range future. A management problem is not solved if immediate profits are purchased by endangering the long range profitability and perhaps even the survival of the company. And on the other hand, a management decision is irresponsible if it risks this year for the sake of a grandiose future. So you have to have the two perspectives in mind. In the previous slide, I have a link to a whitewater rafting situation, and I think that gives a great impression of considering both perspectives. If you're in the whitewater, if you're in a boat in a rapid whitewater river, rapidly flowing, you have to absolutely get through, then past the next boulder and past the next obstacle, because otherwise you'll tumble. But you also have to consider where is the point that you can exit the river, where are the waterfalls, where are rapids that you can't actually get down in a raft, and you have to get off the river before that point. So you have to consider that long run situation while at the same time dealing with the immediacy of the short run. And the good whitewater rafter has to manage both of those two time perspectives simultaneously. Not an easy task. Finally, just a final comment on the nature of strategy by Mintzberg, and he talks about 5 Ps. He talks about the notion of looking forward into the future, that strategy has two time perspectives, future and past. So the planning nature tends to look at the future. And if we think of the strategy for our own organization, or indeed for ourselves, we tend to think of the future as a plan. But also you can consider strategy as a pattern. We mentioned this already. And particularly if you're looking at other firms or other organizations, you don't know what their plan is, but you can infer their strategy to quite a great extent from their pattern of decisions and actions taken in the past. And you can infer what they might do into the future. So that strategy is a pattern. He also introduces 3 further Ps: ploy, position, and perspective. Ploy is really strategy as a stratagem, as a tactic to overcome a specific obstacle. Position is the notion of taking a strategy as a place that you can defend or control, sort of something like the high ground that you can put a barrier around and prevent other people getting to it. And then perspective is more a philosophy. It's looking at, particularly taking this long run, this holistic view, this multiple stakeholder view. You're taking a perspective on a situation, and that's very much, according to Mintzberg, a philosophical approach. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you.